Hard work does not reliably lead to success, and the research proving this has been sitting in the psychology literature for decades, while the culture kept pretending otherwise. The donkey works harder than almost any other animal on the farm. It pulls the heaviest loads, works the longest hours, complains the least, and it owns nothing. So what is the actual variable that separates the people who work hard and get nowhere from the people who work hard and build something that lasts? The answer is not talent, not luck, and not connections, though all three matter more than the work ethic mythology admits. The actual variable is something specific, documented, and almost never discussed in the same breath as effort. And it starts with something almost no one has ever explained clearly about what hard work actually does to the human brain. By the end of this video, you will understand the documented psychology and neuroscience of what actually produces success, why effort alone is consistently insufficient, what the research has identified as the specific variables that transform hard work from a treadmill into genuine progress, and what the people who build something real are doing differently from the people who work just as hard and arrive nowhere. This is grounded in real science, and it is considerably more honest than what most people have been told. Let's begin with the data, because the data is what makes the donkey metaphor not merely poetic but empirically accurate. Research on the relationship between work effort and financial and professional outcomes has consistently found that effort, while positively correlated with outcomes, explains a relatively modest proportion of the variance in who actually succeeds. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of Applied Psychology by nothing.So and colleagues examining over 100 studies found that raw effort, hours worked, intensity of application, persistence through difficulty is a significant predictor of performance, but that it is consistently outweighed by other variables in predicting who achieves genuinely distinctive outcomes. Research by Scott Barry Kaufman at the Columbia University Imagination Institute, synthesizing decades of work on creativity and achievement, found that the people who produce the most significant and most lasting contributions in virtually every domain studied are not the people who work the most hours. They are the people who work strategically, who apply effort in ways that are targeted, informed, and organized around a clear understanding of what the work is actually for and where it needs to go. Research by Malcolm Gladwell's popularization of Anders Ericsson's work on deliberate practice introduced the 10,000 hours rule to public consciousness, the idea that exceptional performance in any domain requires approximately 10,000 hours of focused practice. But Ericsson himself, whose research at Florida State University is the actual source of the claim, consistently emphasized in his own publications that it is not simply 10,000 hours of practice. It is 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. Practice that is specifically structured to address the most important gaps in current performance, that involves immediate feedback, and that operates at the edge of the practitioner's current capability. 10,000 hours of working hard without these specific conditions does not produce exceptional performance. 10,000 hours of a donkey pulling carts does not produce a farmer. The effort is real. The strategic direction, the understanding of what the effort needs to be doing, where it needs to be applied, and what it is building toward, is what the effort alone cannot provide. Research by Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania, whose work on grit became one of the most influential findings in the psychology of achievement, established something important that the popular version of her research consistently misrepresents. Grit, the combination of sustained passion and sustained perseverance, does predict significant outcomes. But it predicts them most powerfully when combined with talent and when the sustained effort is organized around work that genuinely engages the person's intrinsic motivation, grit in the service of the wrong direction, or grit deployed without the specific knowledge of what the effort needs to accomplish, is not the same as grit toward a well-chosen, strategically navigated goal. The donkey is grittier than almost anyone. It works harder and complains less than the farmer. And it owns nothing. Because grit, like effort, is a necessary but not sufficient condition for genuine achievement. And understanding what else is required is the most important thing the research has to say about this. There is a concept in physics and in finance that the psychology of achievement has only recently begun to incorporate with full seriousness. The concept is leverage, and understanding it changes how you think about every hour you spend working. In physics, leverage is the principle that the same force applied at different positions relative to a fulcrum produces dramatically different outcomes. A small force applied at the right point can move a very large object. The same force applied at the wrong point moves nothing, regardless of how long and how hard it is applied. In finance, leverage is the use of borrowed capital to amplify the potential return on investment. A small amount of money in the right position, generating returns that a much larger amount in the wrong position cannot match. Research on what economist Tyler Cowen at George Mason University and others have called talent leverage, the degree to which a person's effort is amplified by the specific context, position, and strategic direction in which it is applied, established that the variance in outcomes between people with similar levels of raw effort is primarily determined by leverage, how well positioned the effort is relative to the specific opportunity, the specific market, the specific moment, and the specific application of the person's genuine strengths. Research by Adam Grant at the Wharton School on Grit versus Grace. The distinction between outcomes produced by sustained effortful work versus outcomes produced by the strategic positioning that allows smaller amounts of effort to produce larger results found that the most successful people in most domains are not the people who work the hardest in absolute terms. They are the people who work the hardest in the highest leverage positions available to them. The donkey is applying effort in a low leverage position. It pulls the cart, which moves the goods, which generates a return that the donkey does not own. The farmer is applying effort in a high leverage position. They are directing the system, deciding what gets grown, what gets sold, what investments are made, what decisions are taken. And the result is ownership of the outcomes, rather than merely participation in the labor. Research by Robert Kiyosaki's framing, which is not academic but reflects a documented economic reality, found that the distinction between working for money and having money work for you is not primarily a moral distinction. It is a leverage distinction. The person in the low leverage position applies effort and receives a proportional return. The person in the high leverage position applies less effort and receives a disproportionate return because the leverage is doing part of the work. The psychological research on how people identify and occupy high leverage positions is more specific and more directly applicable than the popular success literature tends to acknowledge. And it begins with a specific cognitive skill that most people have never been explicitly taught. Research by Philip Tetlock at the University of Pennsylvania on expert political forecasting produced one of the most significant findings in the psychology of judgment and decision making. The people who make the most accurate predictions about complex outcomes are not the ones who know the most about a subject. They are the ones who think most carefully about the difference between what they know and what they do not know, who update their beliefs most readily when new information arrives, and who approach complex questions with a specific quality of intellectual humility and calibrated uncertainty. Tetlock called the best forecasters foxes, after Isaiah Berlin's distinction between foxes who know many things and hedgehogs who know one big thing with great certainty. The hedgehog who has one large confident framework and applies it everywhere tends to be confidently wrong in systematically predictable ways. The fox who holds multiple frameworks lightly and moves between them in response to the specific demands of each situation tends to be more accurate, more adaptive, and more capable of genuine insight into complex situations. The farmer who owns the farm is, in most cases, a fox. They are applying strategic intelligence to the question, what should this farm be doing? Given the specific conditions of the market, the land, the labor, the season, and the longer-term direction of the agricultural economy, they are not working harder than the donkey. They are thinking more carefully about what the work is for. Research by Gary Klein at the Klein Associates Research Division on Naturalistic Decision Making, the study of how experienced practitioners in high-stakes domains make good decisions quickly, found that expert judgment is not primarily the application of formal decision-making algorithms. It is pattern recognition, the rapid identification of the relevant features of a situation based on experience, and the intuitive generation of the most likely effective response. Experts see the situation differently from novices, they notice more, they understand the causal relationships more clearly, and they generate better options more efficiently. This pattern recognition, this strategic intelligence, is the cognitive resource that the farmer has and the donkey does not. The donkey sees the cart, the farmer sees the market, the season, the weather forecast, the buyer's needs, and the dozen decision points at which effort can be applied most efficiently and most productively. The development of strategic intelligence is not a matter of education in the narrow sense. Research by K. Anders Ericsson on expertise in deliberate practice found that expert pattern recognition is developed through sustained, specific engagement with a domain, with the specific additional ingredient of deliberate reflection on the patterns encountered, not just experiencing the situations, but actively asking, what was happening here? What were the determining factors? What would I do differently? The deliberate extraction of pattern from experience is the mechanism by which experience becomes expertise rather than simply habit. The donkey has experience. It does not have strategic intelligence about that experience. The farmer has experience and has done the specific cognitive work of turning that experience into strategic understanding. The difference is not innate, it is developed through specific cognitive habits, and those habits are both teachable and learnable at any point in adult life. Let's be honest about the aspect of the donkey-farmer distinction that the success mythology most reliably suppresses, the role of circumstances that the individual did not choose and cannot entirely control. Research by Robert Frank at Cornell University, whose book Success and Luck, Good Fortune, and the Myth of Meritocracy synthesizes the economic and psychological evidence, established that the outcomes of most people's professional and financial lives are substantially influenced by factors that have nothing to do with their effort or their intelligence, the specific time and place of birth, the specific economic conditions of the decade in which they were building their career, the specific random encounters that opened or closed doors, the specific social networks they were born into or happened to fall into. Research by Nassim Nicholas Taleb on what he calls the fooled by randomness phenomenon documented the systematic human tendency to construct post hoc narratives of talent, strategy, and effort to explain outcomes that had a significant random component. The business that succeeded in the window of opportunity that happened to exist. The career that benefited from the specific economic tailwind of a particular decade. The investment that paid off because the market moved in the right direction at the right time. Research on survivorship bias, documented in the statistics literature and brought to popular attention by Abraham Wald's famous work during World War II, established that the people who are most visible as success examples are precisely the people who succeeded, which means they systematically exclude the much larger population of people who attempted the same things with comparable effort, skill, and strategy, and did not succeed because the circumstances were not aligned. The survivor tells the story of their success. The non-survivor does not tell any story. And the stories we hear are therefore systematically biased toward the narrative of effort and strategy led to success. Because those are the stories that are available to be told. This does not mean that effort and strategy are irrelevant. They are clearly relevant. The research on luck and outcomes is not arguing that nothing matters. It is arguing that what matters is a combination of genuine effort, genuine strategy, and genuine alignment with circumstances, and that ignoring the circumstantial dimension produces both a distorted understanding of how outcomes are achieved and a distorted moral evaluation of people who work hard and do not achieve distinctive outcomes. The donkey that does not own the farm is not failing because of inadequate effort. It may be in the wrong position, working in a context that does not amplify its effort, at a moment in time when the structures that would allow it to own something are not available to it. And the solution is not simply to tell it to work harder, but understanding the circumstantial dimension does not license passivity, because the research has also found something important about the relationship between preparation and circumstance that changes how you understand what strategy is actually for. The aphorism often attributed to Louis Pasteur, chance favors the prepared mind, is not merely a motivational slogan. It describes a specific and documented psychological and behavioral mechanism. Research on what psychologists call serendipity and what behavioral scientists have studied as the prepared mind effect established that the same circumstantial opportunities are more likely to be noticed, recognized as opportunities, and acted on by people who have developed relevant preparation in the domain. The opportunity is not more available to them, it is more visible to them, and visibility is the first requirement for action. Research by Richard Walland at the Stockholm School of Economics and others on opportunity recognition found that the capacity to identify valuable opportunities, to see the specific configuration of circumstances that a prepared mind would recognize as actionable, is not randomly distributed. It is strongly correlated with domain-specific knowledge and with what researchers call entrepreneurial alertness. The specific attentional quality of scanning the environment for signals that a prepared framework can recognize as significant. The farmer who owns the farm recognizes the circumstances that allow the farm to expand. The donkey does not recognize them because recognition requires a framework that the donkey does not have. Both the farmer and the donkey experience the same circumstances. One of them is prepared to see the opportunity in them. Research by Daniel Kahneman at Princeton on System 1 and System 2 thinking is relevant here. System 1, the fast automatic intuitive processing that generates immediate recognition, is trained by experience and preparation. The expert who instinctively recognizes the opportunity is not bypassing cognition. They are deploying a highly trained pattern recognition system that automatically flags the relevant features of the situation. The novice processes the same situation through slower, more effortful System 2 analysis, and by the time the analysis is complete, the opportunity may have passed. This is the mechanism behind chance favors the prepared mind. The preparation does not create the circumstances. It creates the cognitive architecture to recognize the circumstances as an opportunity and act on them with sufficient speed and accuracy. The specific preparation that produces this recognition is not simply the accumulation of experience. It is the deliberate, reflective extraction of pattern from experience that we discussed in the previous section. The person who has not only worked in a domain for years, but who has actively studied the patterns of their domain, who has asked what works, why it works, when it works, and what the conditions are that make it possible, has built the specific pattern recognition system that luck becomes visible through. The donkey does not study the farm, it pulls the cart. The farmer studies the farm, the seasons, the soil, the market, the technology, the competition, the longer arc of what this type of operation has become across the people who have run it. And in studying, the farmer builds the pattern recognition that makes circumstance actionable. But there is still a piece of this that has not yet been fully examined, the piece that is perhaps the most personally uncomfortable to confront, and that the research has documented as the single most differentiating variable between people who build something and people who don't. Research by Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia on introspective access, synthesized in his book Strangers to Ourselves, established that human beings have significantly less accurate access to their own mental processes, values, strengths, and genuine motivations than they believe. The reasons people give for their own choices are frequently post hoc constructions that do not accurately reflect the actual cognitive processes that produce the choices. The understanding people have of their own genuine strengths and weaknesses is systematically biased by self-enhancement, wishful thinking, and the absence of genuine comparative data. Research by Tasha Yurik at the Research Institute for Business Strategy on Self-Awareness found that while 95% of people believe they are self-aware, only 10 to 15% actually demonstrate the specific behaviors and cognitive patterns associated with genuine self-awareness in their studies. The gap between perceived and actual self-knowledge is one of the most consistent and most consequential findings in the psychology of achievement. The donkey is working hard in the direction it was given. It has not asked whether this is the direction that best utilizes its specific strengths, positions it for genuine leverage, or aligns with what the specific context requires. It is applying effort without the specific self-knowledge that would allow it to direct that effort toward the highest value application of its particular capacities. Research by Marcus Buckingham and Donald Clifton at the Gallup organization, published in Now, Discover Your Strengths, found that the most productive people are not those who have the most effort or the most diverse skill sets. They are the people who have accurately identified their genuine strengths, the specific activities that they find energizing, that they perform better than most people without comparable effort, and that produce the best results in the domain they are working in, and who have organized their effort predominantly around those strengths. People who work predominantly in their areas of genuine strength perform measurably better, are more engaged, and report higher well-being than people who work predominantly in areas of weakness. Not because they are more talented overall, because they are directing their effort where it produces the most leverage relative to the effort invested. Most people spend the majority of their working life trying to improve their weaknesses. The organizational cultures they operate in are structured around the identification and remediation of deficiencies. And the research suggests that this is, in most cases, the wrong direction. The donkey does not own the farm, partly because it is spending its energy trying to think like the farmer, rather than doing what it uniquely does better than the farmer can. The self-knowledge deficit, the specific failure to accurately understand one's own genuine strengths, one's own genuine motivations, and the specific types of work in which one's effort produces genuinely exceptional rather than merely adequate results, is one of the primary reasons that hard work does not reliably lead to success. Because work that is hard but misdirected is work that is doing the donkey's job on the farmer's farm. And the development of genuine self-knowledge, not the self-awareness of the Instagram caption, but the specific, honest, comparatively grounded understanding of what one actually does best and where one's effort produces genuinely disproportionate returns, is one of the most valuable and most accessible investments available to any person at any stage of life. But there is one more dimension of the research that is the most important and that this video has been building toward. And it involves what the research has found about the relationship between meaning, direction, and the specific quality of effort that actually accumulates into something worth owning. Here is the finding that changes the frame of everything we have been discussing. And it requires stepping back from the question of how people succeed to ask a more fundamental question. What are they actually trying to build? Research by Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor whose logotherapy framework established meaning as the primary human motivation, and by more recent researchers including Michael Steger at Colorado State University on meaning in life, established that the quality and sustainability of human effort are fundamentally determined by the degree to which the effort is directed towards something the person experiences as genuinely meaningful. Effort toward a genuinely meaningful goal is self-sustaining, resilient, and generative. It produces more capacity as it is applied. The specific mechanism of what Albert Bandura at Stanford calls mastery experiences. Au through which genuine competent action builds the self-efficacy that enables further competent action. Effort toward a goal that is pursued for external reasons, money, status, the approval of others, depletes more quickly, is more vulnerable to setbacks, and is less likely to produce the creative, adaptive engagement that the most complex and valuable work requires. Research by Dicey and Ryan at the University of Rochester on self-determination theory established that intrinsically motivated effort organized around what the person genuinely values and finds genuinely engaging, produces higher quality work, greater persistence, more creative problem solving, and better long-term outcomes than extrinsically motivated effort, even when the external rewards are significant. The donkey is extrinsically motivated. It is working for the carrot, not for the farm. And extrinsic motivation, the motivation generated by reward rather than genuine engagement, is, the research shows, systematically inferior to intrinsic motivation in producing the specific qualities of engaged, creative, adaptive effort that build something worth owning over time. But here is the piece that is most important, the finding that the success mythology consistently misses because it is focused on the achievement rather than the achiever. Research by Cal Newport at Georgetown University on deep work, the cognitively demanding, uninterrupted, focused engagement with the most complex and most valuable tasks established that the productivity gap between deep work and shallow work is not linear. It is exponential. The person who does 4 hours of genuinely deep, focused, high-leverage work produces dramatically more value than the person who does 8 or 10 or 12 hours of shallow, fragmented, reactive work. The donkey works long hours. It does not do deep work. It does repetitive, demand-driven, reactive labor. The cognitive equivalent of pulling carts from point A to point B, day after day, without the specific concentrated engagement with the most complex and most value-generating aspects of the operation. Research by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi at Claremont Graduate University on flow, the state of complete cognitive absorption in a challenging, engaging task, found that this state, which is both the most subjectively rewarding and the most productively efficient form of cognitive engagement, requires specific conditions. A clear goal, immediate feedback, and a challenge level that is closely matched to the person's current skill level. The donkey does not access flow because cart pulling does not require the specific cognitive engagement that flow demands. The person who is building something that accumulates, who is doing the specific work that compounds over time and eventually produces genuine leverage and genuine ownership, is almost always doing genuinely deep work in a genuinely meaningful direction, with a genuinely clear understanding of what they are trying to build and why. Not necessarily more hours, not necessarily more intense effort in the absolute sense, more concentrated, more directed, more strategically deployed effort in the highest leverage areas of their specific domain. And the question that this reframe generates, the question that separates the donkey from the farmer at the level that actually matters, is not how hard am I working? It is what am I actually building, not what the immediate task is, not what the week's obligations are, what the longer arc of the effort is producing, what it is accumulating toward. What if the work continues with clarity and direction, will exist at the end of it that does not exist now? The donkey has no answer to this question because the donkey has not been asked it and would not be empowered to act on the answer if it were. But you are being asked it now, and the answer, honest, specific, genuinely considered, is the beginning of the specific difference between effort that accumulates into something worth owning and effort that simply continues. Research by James Clear at various institutions, synthesizing the behavioral science of habit and compound improvement, established a finding that is both simple and significant. The difference between a trajectory that compounds and a trajectory that plateaus is not the size of the individual improvement, it is the consistency of the direction. A 1% improvement sustained consistently over time produces outcomes that are dramatically different from a 10% improvement followed by regression. The compounding is in the consistency, not the intensity, and the consistency is itself a function of the strategic intelligence we discussed earlier, the capacity to maintain direction across the disruptions and distractions that ordinary life continuously generates. Research by Carol Dweck at Stanford on growth mindset found that the people who show the most sustained improvement over time are not the ones with the highest initial ability or the ones who work the hardest in any individual period. They are the ones who maintain genuine engagement with the specific feedback that each period of effort provides, who treat every setback as information, every result as data, and every outcome as an input into the next direction of effort. The donkey does not compound because it does not learn. Each day's cart pulling is essentially identical to the previous days. There is no trajectory of improvement, no accumulation of strategic intelligence, no development of the specific cognitive resources that would eventually change the nature of the work from labor to leverage. Research by Warren Buffett's oft-cited observation that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. applies as directly to cognitive development and strategic skill as it does to financial investment. The person who is consistently learning from their work, consistently improving the quality of their strategic understanding, consistently developing the pattern recognition that allows increasingly high leverage applications of their effort, that person's output compounds over time in ways that the person who is simply working hard cannot match, because the compound return on strategic intelligence operates at a different rate from the linear return on raw effort. The specific mechanism that makes some effort compound and some effort simply continue is the presence or absence of genuine reflective learning, not the experience itself. The donkey has enormous experience. The deliberate extraction of insight from experience, the systematic building of the pattern recognition library that eventually allows the experienced practitioner to see what the novice cannot see and do what the novice cannot do in significantly less time and with significantly more accuracy. Research by Erickson on deliberate practice found that the specific ingredient that separates experts who continue to improve from practitioners who plateau is the maintained engagement with genuine difficulty. The consistent practice at the edge of current capability, where the challenge requires full cognitive engagement rather than habitual repetition. The donkey is practicing pulling carts. It has mastered pulling carts and is now simply repeating the mastery. The farmer is continuously practicing the next level of strategic challenge, the new market, the new technology, the new decision about how to deploy the resources of the farm, and is therefore continuously developing the capabilities that compound over time. Let's address directly the dimension of success that the work ethic mythology most aggressively suppresses. The role of social networks and relationships in determining who gets access to the opportunities that high leverage effort can be applied to. Research by Mark Granovetta at Stanford University, whose 1973 paper, The Strength of Weak Ties, is among the most cited in all of sociology, established that the most consequential information and opportunities in most people's professional and personal lives come not from their closest relationships, but from their weak ties, the acquaintances, the professional contacts, the people they know less well, but who are connected to different parts of the social network. Close relationships tend to share the same information, the same networks, the same opportunities. Weak ties connect different networks, and therefore provide access to information and opportunities that the close circle does not have. Research by Lin, Ensel, and Vaughan on social capital found that the access individuals have to social resources, information, connections, opportunities, endorsements is substantially determined by the structure and quality of their social network, and that this access is a significant predictor of professional and economic outcomes independent of individual talent and effort. The farmer who owns the farm almost certainly acquired that ownership partly through access to capital, information, and opportunities that were available through their social network. The person who told them about the land, the bank that gave them the loan because they knew someone, the buyer who trusted them because of a shared connection. The donkey's social network consists entirely of other donkeys and the farmer. And the farmer is not sharing the network that would allow the donkey to become a farmer. Research by Robert Putnam at Harvard on social capital established that the communities and societies in which high levels of genuine social trust and network reciprocity exist show consistently better economic and social outcomes than communities with low social capital. Not because the individuals in high trust communities are more talented or work harder, but because the network effects of high social capital amplify individual effort in ways that low social capital cannot. The practical implication of this research is specific. The development and deliberate cultivation of a network that provides access to the kinds of information, opportunity, and support that high leverage effort requires is not a social supplement to the real work. It is part of the real work. And treating it as incidental, as the kind of thing that happens naturally if you just work hard enough, ignores decades of research on how opportunities are actually created and distributed. The donkey does not network, it pulls carts. And the carts it pulls are determined by the farmer's decisions about what needs to be transported, not by the donkey's understanding of what would be most valuable to move. Research by Gary Klein on naturalistic decision-making, combined with research by Kahneman on the cognitive biases that systematically distort human judgment, points toward one of the most important but least discussed variables in the psychology of achievement, the quality of decision-making. Most people, most of the time, make decisions in a way that is significantly compromised by cognitive biases that operate below the level of conscious awareness. The availability heuristic, the tendency to overweight information that comes readily to mind, confirmation bias, the tendency to seek and weight information that confirms existing beliefs, the sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue investing in directions because of past investment rather than future value, overconfidence bias, the tendency to overestimate one's own judgment and abilities in specific domains. These biases do not only produce individual errors, they produce systematic, predictable patterns of misdirected effort that compound over time. The person who's working very hard on the wrong things, because their decision making is systematically biased toward the wrong things, is working with high effort and low decision quality. And research by Philip Tetlock on forecasting accuracy found that the people with the lowest decision quality in complex domains are often the most confident in that quality, because overconfidence bias and the availability heuristic combine to produce the subjective experience of clarity even in the absence of genuine accuracy. Research by Shane Frederick at Yale on cognitive reflection, the capacity to catch and correct the farce. Intuitive responses of System 1 with the slower, more careful deliberation of System 2 found that people with higher cognitive reflection scores make measurably better decisions across multiple domains, including financial decisions, health decisions, and strategic professional choices. The difference is not intelligence in the abstract, it is the specific habit of pausing long enough to check the fast intuitive response before acting on it. The farmer's decisions compound the value of the farm over time because they are, on average, better calibrated than the donkey's decisions would be if the donkey were making them. Not necessarily because the farmer is smarter, because the farmer has developed the specific decision quality practices, the deliberate reflection on past decisions and their outcomes, the active seeking of disconfirming information, the explicit modeling of the alternative scenarios before committing, that produce better decisions across the most consequential choices. There is a dimension of the donkey-farmer distinction that is rarely named directly in achievement literature, but that the psychological research has documented with considerable precision. It is the role of identity in constraining the direction and ambition of effort. Research by Claude Steele at Stanford on stereotype threat. The documented phenomenon in which the salience of a stereotyped identity impairs performance in domains associated with that stereotype established that the specific identity categories a person belongs to can, under certain conditions, reduce cognitive performance in specific domains, not because of any actual limitation, but because the threat of confirming a negative stereotype about the group activates cognitive resources for threat monitoring rather than task performance. Research by Herminia Ibarra on working identity found that the implicit answer people give to the question, "Who am I and what kind of person does someone like me become?" is one of the most powerful constraints on the choices they make and the directions they pursue. People do not typically pursue directions that feel inconsistent with their current self-concept, even when those directions would be genuinely more aligned with their values and more productive of genuine outcomes. The donkey does not try to own the farm, partly because donkeys do not own farms. The self-concept does not include the possibility of ownership, and the self-concept is, in ways that operate largely below conscious awareness, one of the primary filters on what options are genuinely considered and genuinely pursued. Research by Carol Dweck and others on identity and self-concept change found that genuine change in the direction and ambition of one's effort typically requires some revision of the identity that is organizing the effort. Not a total abandonment of existing identity, research on identity discontinuity suggests that radical identity changes are psychologically costly and destabilizing, but the specific addition to the self-concept of the elements of the new identity that the new direction requires. The person who wants to build something, to own something, to move from the donkey's position to the farmer's, will at some point need to begin constructing and inhabiting a self-concept that includes the possibility of ownership. Not through affirmations or wishful thinking, through the specific, real, embodied experience of doing the things that farmers do. Making the strategic decisions, developing the strategic intelligence, building the network, practicing the decision quality, until those behaviors are genuinely, authentically part of who the person is rather than a performance of who they would like to be. Let's bring all of this together, because the point of this video is not to discourage effort, it is to redirect it. Hard work is necessary, effort is necessary, persistence is necessary. The person who does not work, who does not apply sustained and serious effort to what they are trying to build, will not build it. The donkey's effort is real and it matters. Without the donkey's effort, the cart does not move and the farm does not function. But effort alone, effort without strategic intelligence, without genuine self-knowledge, without the specific positioning that allows effort to compound, without the decision quality that directs effort toward its highest leverage applications, without the identity that can genuinely inhabit the outcomes the effort is building toward, effort alone is not sufficient. The donkey's evidence is clear and documented. What the research is pointing toward is a specific integration, the combination of genuine sustained effort with the specific cognitive, social, and strategic resources that transform effort from labor into leverage, not less work, different work, not harder effort. More strategically directed effort applied to the highest value applications of the person's genuine strengths in the context of a network that provides access to relevant opportunity with the decision quality that makes each choice more likely to compound rather than reset. Research by Angela Duckworth, Carol Dweck, Adam Grant, Erickson, Tetlock, Granovetta, and every other researcher whose work we have drawn on in this video is pointing at the same underlying insight. What separates the people who build something from the people who work just as hard and remain in the same position is not the effort itself. It is the direction, the leverage, the self-knowledge, and the strategic intelligence through which the effort is applied. The donkey can become the farmer, not by pulling harder. By developing the specific understanding of what the farm requires, what the market demands, what the land can produce, and what decisions, applied consistently and intelligently over time, will produce genuine ownership of something worth owning. The capacity is there. The question is whether the effort is going to be applied to pulling carts or to understanding what it takes to own them. Here is what I want to leave you with. At some point in the next week, take 30 minutes and ask yourself the most important question that the donkey has never been asked. What am I actually building? Not what are my immediate obligations, not what task is at the top of the list. What is the longer arc of the effort I am currently applying, and what will exist at the end of it that does not exist now? If the answer is clear and genuinely compelling, the next question is the effort I am applying positioned to compound toward that outcome, or is it the equivalent of pulling carts? Is it building the strategic intelligence, the self-knowledge, the decision quality, and the network position that will eventually produce ownership of something worth owning? And if the honest answer to that second question is uncertain, that uncertainty is the most valuable information you could have. Because the donkey that does not know why it is pulling the cart will never stop pulling it. And the person who does know, who has been honest about what they are actually building and what the effort needs to actually do, has already taken the most consequential single step toward the farm. If this kind of specific, research-grounded, honest conversation about how achievement actually works, as opposed to how the mythology says it works, is what you are looking for, this channel is built for exactly that. Each video is the same commitment, the science without the platitudes, and the honesty without the false comfort. See you in the next one.